Very good. So we have one more session before we take a short coffee break. I would like to invite Shems to come up to the stage and tell us a little bit more about PMCF and how we can utilize PMCF activities to decrease cost of clinical trials.
All right, thank you very much.
Let's use the mic work.
I use this. So hello. So first I will introduce myself. So I spent the last 10 years doing clinical trials within the CRO and also within the manufacturers. And I am glad also to have within my team people with wealthy experience like Edmund, like Brian. We take compliance very seriously. So we work according to the ISO 13885. 27001 and GDPR. This is really important as a critical supplier to our customers. We have a medical team within the company in various therapeutic areas like cardiovascular, orthopedics, dentals. And we do also innovations in collaboration with Oracle, University of Canada, CHU of Montpellier. This is the app we are developing, will be released in October. Medical interface liaison officer. Will help in the recruitment of patients, releasing real-world data silo, patient surveillance for long affections, released in October, and recognized by the French government to be innovative startup for less than 10 years. It's like a label. 13% of research deductions for the client they work with us, and recognized by the UK. We work with them for the next 5 years to help the innovative startups compliance with, this is 12 studies already submitted under the MDR for the BSI GMED successfully. So this is just to let you know who we are, what we have done so far. What I'm going to talk about is how to collect clinical data under the MDR, which strategy you're going to use. And it's also important to know that there is the options to collect the data outside of the EU. If you're going to do it, how the notified body view that. This is the paradigm when you start to use your PMCF activity. Everything starts with the CER, the main documents. You're going to identify deficiencies in clinical data, yes or no. You're going to have a plan to collect this data, and you're going to execute that plan. You're going to execute it in different type of studies. But which one you're going to choose, right? So in March 2023, we established the guideline with the BSI, with the Global Head of Clinical Compliance, will be released in March, in order to help the manufacturers to know basically which strategy you need to use for your device and what is the challenges and how you overcome those challenges. But before going to that, I'm going to ask you questions. Which one of you will choose the PMCF activity according to the budget? Raise hands. Okay, 1, 2, like the hands like this. Don't be shy. Okay, this is the client that I will not speak with them because they don't have the money. Which one here will choose the PMCF activity because he saw his competitor doing this activity, then he gonna do the same? No one? No one copy paste? Okay, and now which one of the companies that have the money and they will select the PMCF activity according to the risk of device, the level of evidence they want to choose, the data that have already captured, and they want to capture other one in a different design. All right. This is the rich companies there that I'm gonna talk with you later. All right. So before I give you an answer, I'm just joking. Give you an answer. So PMCF is a continuous process. I think everybody knows. You need to collect data on safety and performance, and you have to prove that performance that works until the last day of the lifetime of your device. When you need to do PMCF study, or maybe when you don't need to do it, but when you do it, I think everybody knows this. When it is a new technology, when it is high risk, when the data are outdated, when there is significant change in your device, when there is like a new emergent risk. how to choose your PMCF activity. Basically, you don't choose. Your PMCF activity strategy are chosen or driven by this point here. I did not say all of it, but this is like the main point. I will go after one of which: clinical claims, clinical endpoints, the class of device, level of evidence required, and the history of the clinical data already collected. So before you go to this, you need to do a gap analysis of the deficiency of data. All right? So what you're going after is you want to get sufficient clinical data, and these sufficient clinical data need to be collected in the appropriate method. Some considerations how to do a gap analysis. You ask these questions. Do you collect clinical data that cover the lifetime of your device? Are the clinical data cover every variant, every indications, every anatomic locations, unless you prove that the clinical data for this variant could be extrapolable to another variable? Are further data required to strengthen the clinical data that support the device claims and benefits? I'll give you a bit of stories. We have a device exists in the market since 20 years. It's a vascular patch used for carotid, used for femoral. So the manufacturers told the GMAD, notified body, we have clinical data for the carotid. The results is extrapolable to the femoral, and they don't need to collect clinical data for the femoral part. The notified body says no. They give decisions. They says, no, we don't accept that. We need clinical data on the femoral part. This is two different anatomic locations. How are you going to prove that the data you have? He wants to prove it with few articles get from PubMed, but what was not accepted. They gave them, I think, 3 to 6 months. This patch is used for 10 years, for lifetime, so they have to provide clinical evidence for 10 years. How are you going to collect clinical evidence for 10 years within 6 months? And this is like a blockbuster for them. They can't afford to lose it. So here is the paradigm here. So what PMCF strategy are you going to use to collect clinical evidence for the femoral anatomy to provide evidence to your notified body that it works also efficiently the same as for the carotid? And you have 6 months of period to do it. Are you going to go through a survey? Are you going to go through traditional clinical trials? Are you going to go through real-world evidence generation program like observational study, retrospective or prospective? Obviously, the conditions will define here your strategy. If the data already exists within the hospital or wherever it is, so that's where you're going afterward. And you have to choose your source of data, because when we talk about real-world data, there is many sources, and there is no source of data perfect. They all have holes, all have gaps. You need to choose the one that is adequate to your problem here. So the information we got is we're looking for what we have basically discussed with GMAD and what we have engaged with them is we're going to provide evidence for medium term, and we engage afterward to provide data for 10 years because we can't have it at the moment. And this is called clinical development plan. So we give them a plan of collecting the 10 years. So you tell them, okay, I give you in a short period of time, and afterward we give you 10 years after. That's okay. So how do you know the amount of the follow-up of time? So you cannot say it randomly. I can give you 1 year, or I can give you 10 years, 2 years. So the Vascular Society defines basically how to prove that the device could be performant for a medium term, and they define a period of 3 years. And this is also the protocol in the hospitals. They ask their patient to come back 3 years after to do some imaging technique to know the rate of reoperation, the rate of amputations, the death, to know if the the surgery, the implant works. So we have to engage with them to do a real-world study, retrospectively, for a follow-up of 3 years, and which source of data we can use. There is, at Teclivar, we use two different sources. We use the EHR from the patient in the hospital, and there is also the medical claims that you can use also. So here is the different sources, EHR, medical claims, but you have also patient-generated data, health status, social media data, and patient support program. And we only have the capabilities to use these two sources. So how are we going to choose between these two sources? So if you're looking for granular informations, not big patients, not large pool of patients, but smaller, not for longer follow-up, but you need very detailed informations. It's the HR. If you're looking for a large pool of patients, not granular information, longer follow-up, it's the medical claims. So obviously, that's what we want for the short term to answer the GMAT. 6 months was enough to retrieve the clinical evidence from 3 centers, 300 of patients, representative populations. And it was in France, only in one country, and it was sufficient. It was not perfect, but it was sufficient for the GMAT to let the manufacturer continue to sell the device in the market. All right? This is another example. Implantable port. Class 3, this is the claims of the manufacturers. There is many indication. There is chemotherapy, antibiotic, blood sampling, parenteral nutrition. And you can use it for adults, you can use it for pediatric. They have variants, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 series. And they have clinical data about the chemotherapy. And they said, to the notified body, the data we generated from the chemotherapy is extrapolable to the antibiotics, blood sampling, parenteral nutrition. Why? Because the device is a just delivery device. They deliver drugs. They don't do the drugs actions, they just deliver. So if we have informations, evidence about for one drug, so that's going to be the same for the other. Notified body say no. I need also for this and for who starts first? It's not notified body. They started the Australian TGA. Red flag. I don't have for the pediatric, and they gave them just 1 month to answer, to give them the evidence. Obviously, they can't. And the device was retrieved from the Australian. The regulatory agency, they couldn't communicate with each other. 1 month later, it's now the MHRI, right? I want to my clinical evidence. Where is it? And afterward, where there is an audit, they knew they're gonna have a problem with all of this indication. So the first actions of we discussed, because there is budget problem here, and we can't retrieve clinical evidence for all of this indication because you need patient for all of it. So the main decision of manufacturers is to retrieve some of these indications. We can't back it up all of them. But they needed to back up these two populations, really important. They're blockbuster. And we were successful on this. We have also a clinical development plan. We need to retrieve data for medium term and the long term. And the medium term, when you want to do real-world data strategy to retrieve the data, you need to do feasibility first. Because if you're going after a follow-up for 3 to 5 years, you need to ensure that the patients, the data of the patients are there until 5 years. You know why? Because when you go into surgery, patients go into surgery, have an implant or whatever, he's gonna come back three months later to do a consultations. He's gonna come back 1 year later to do a consultation. If everything is okay, he will not come back later to the hospital. He's gonna do his consultation in his city. And the medical data in the city are not connected to the HR. So disconnect the flow of information, all right? So before you go in after doing this feasibility, which is hard to do the feasibility because you cannot in front the hospital give you, okay, I can give you a follow-up of 5 years. They can't say that until you do the study, they will tell you. But how do you know that? There is like some technique where you can try to retrieve the protocol of standard of care of the hospitals. what is their standard of care of following of patients. So they will give you a little bit of insights. Okay. By speaking with these claims, indication, etc., I want to talk about the claims. So we have safety claims, performance claims, lifetime of device, because you can claim it is performant until 1 year, 10 years, lifetime. It is a claim too, okay? So how do you do this claim? So I'll give you here examples, because the way you're going to claim will impact your strategy, your PMCF strategy, and the level of evidence. Example, you're going to claim, my device is superior than the standard of care. Are you able to prove this with a survey? Obviously not. You're going to do an RCT, and you're going to do big RCT with a lot of patients, with a lot of centers to prove it, because you claim that it's superior, right? But what I have observed from the clients and from the notified body, that even the claims is not good in a way it is claimed by the manufacturers. This is like different answer from different notified body, from different manufacturers. A clear position regarding the clinical performance claim should be presented. The claim on clinical performance are not clearly documented. Claims on clinical performance are not satisfactory. Claims are not defined. I give right to the notified body because, let's say an example of the vaccine of COVID, because make it easy. You have vaccine of Pfizer, vaccine of Johnson & Johnson, vaccine of Putin, Rasputin. Right? You're going to say, okay, my vaccine, everybody going to say my vaccine works efficiently and it is safe for pediatric and adults. But how I can compare between the three? Everyone is going to say the same. But how the data could tell me that this is better than the other? But if someone is going to say my device works is efficient at 80%, the other one is going to say my device works at 95%, the other going to say 70%. You know that one say my device works better than the other, and he needs to provide evidence that is better than the other. As soon as this manufacturer, they started to claim quantitatively, because notified bodies say, I cannot evaluate your CER until you give me quantitative claims. He stopped the evaluation until the manufacturer provided quantitative claims. But as soon as he provided quantitative claims, this face of the CER changed. And it becomes obvious that he doesn't have the data to back up his claims. All right. What PMCF strategy are you going to choose to collect the data that cover the lifetime? I just come back into the story of the implantable device and the patch, because they are two implants that are done for the lifetime of device. So we've done the retrospective study in 6 months, and it was successful. We retrieved data for 3 years, but it is not enough for the notified body. You need to go further. You need to collect after. So the client basically, he engaged with them. He told them that we're going to do a registry for 10 years now. But my question is, he said this because he have seen the competitor doing the same. And I told him, have you done before registry of 10 years? No. Is there anybody here who had done a registry of 10 years? A follow-up 10 years? Okay, how it was it? It's a pain in the ass, okay? So what happens when you do a registry of 10 years? A registry is a real-life setting study. It's not like when you do clinical investigations, you're going to recruit good quality patients. Like me, you tell them, come 1 year at this time, come the 3 years, you explain to them the clinical trial, they understood. In the registry, you're going to have pregnant women. You're going to have that old man that lives 20 kilometers away from your center, that have multi-pathology, that have concomitant medications. Even though for his consultation, they don't go until he can't breathe, okay? So you're dealing with this kind of patients when you do a registry of 10 years. So basically, the study for a cardiovascular, particularly vascular patient, 50% of the patient, you lose them after 5 years of follow-up, 50%. So if you engage in 10 years registry, which costs approximately 5 million euros, so not only you're going to use the money, but you are going to use the 10 years you spend. In the end, the results will not be effective, it's not sufficient, and not accepted by your notified body. This milestone must be error-free when you do this. If you have not done 10 years registry, don't do it by your own. However, there is solutions. So the most effective method for obtaining late follow-up, you need to do a combinations of two studies in parallel. There is what we call existing administrative data sets. Example, in France, it's called SNDS, medical claims. Combine 60 million patients over different regions. It contains metadata a lot, but it contains also important data. It's not granular enough, but it contains data for reinterventions, imagings. It contains data for death. Okay, this is like important informations. And obviously, as I said before, everything they have gaps. Every method you're gonna choose, they have challenge. They have gaps. Just like acknowledge that and try to use the right one. There is basically in medical claims, the clinical information are coded into procedures. So each time you do a procedure, it's coded, and the data scientist is gonna look for the code. And sometimes the code is like inaccurate, or sometimes there's like an error in code. All right, and so you just like need to take care and acknowledge that. If you take the 10 years of registry rather than doing it for 1,000 patients, which is gonna cost you 5 million euros approximately for a vascular study, and you're gonna lose those patients 5 years later, there is another pathway. So you can do two things in parallel. You can collect, using with SNDS, like 3,000 patients very easily. Within 1 year, you can obtain the result. You modulate that within a registry of 10 years, but with 100 patients. You're gonna select them because it will not be a registry for a real lifetime. You're gonna select 100 patients very well, follow them very well for 10 years, and combine the two so they can give you good, well results accepted by the HS reimbursement organism in France, high standard, they notified body in terms of level of evidence. So this kind of strategy that you need to look after. So by speaking by real-world traditional clinical trials, I'm gonna just remind that data generated from prospective or pre-market clinical trial, they allow you to get into the market. And this data you generate can be predicted, like long-term and the medium-term outcome can be predicted based on pre-market duration, but still inadequate to validate the extrapolation hypothesis in real life. Remember, every study that you're gonna do, your ultimate goal is, do my results reflect the real-world setting? It's like the basic question you're gonna ask yourself every time. And the second problem with the clinical investigation is the restrictive eligibility criteria. A group of researchers in the UK, they took 33,000 clinical trials set up in the UK, included approximately 5 million patients. In this paper, you can find it. Their main question, they want to say, I want to quantify how extend the exclusion criteria of these studies, the 33,000. And second one, they want to know this vulnerable population that was excluded from these trials, what is the percentage of prevalence of these populations being actively prescribed the same medication and medical device? And you know what they found? Adolescent and older populations are highly excluded, but together, they make approximately 50% of the real-world population. When you make an RCT trials, and you're gonna say, I'm gonna get the sufficient medical data because you can't beat the RCT trials, but it doesn't reflect the real-world settings. It's not sufficient. Individuals with concomitant conditions and medications used are frequently excluded. They represent 67% of the populations being actively prescribed the medical device or drugs, excluded from the RCT trials. So together, if you take these two information from the 43,000 trials, RCT done in the UK, take it together, they give poor external validity, they have scarcity of evidence-based medicine. they don't accurately quantify treatment risk and benefits. So the lesson learned from this is when you want to get sufficient clinical data, you need to get it from different designs. Not only one design, but from different design. You need like restrictive design when you want to provide high quality level of evidence. I'm speaking here for high risk devices, obviously. And you need to combine that to bring informations from the vulnerable population you have excluded at first. So then you will get representative population, and then you know what is the real impact of your device on the real world setting. So just to remind you here, the difference between real world evidence and real world data. Yes, other information is you have to make sure, I don't see anybody speaking about it, about primary sources of real world data and secondary sources of real world data, and you have to understand the advantages and disadvantages. So just definition, primary sources is the sources you get from the hospital. So if you are the first person who retrieving those data from the hospitals, and the secondaries, you're gonna buy it from the data broker, CRO, wherever. And so, as I said, every trial you're gonna set, you're gonna ask your question, does it reflect the real world settings? By asking these questions, do I have included the elderly patients? Have pregnancy? Do you have is it like the results can be globalized? And they give you feedback from notified body. Pregnancy woman. What basically he says, pregnant women and children, it says it is not contraindicated, but you have never evaluated them in your PMCF activity. Therefore, if this population are not evaluated, then it should be contraindicated, which is true. Here a reminder for every time you set up a clinical study or wherever, you have to make sure that of this tricky, you never have clinical study that goes on time. Never. We never have a study on time. You have to just acknowledge that. Patient recruitments. You go into a patient, you want to investigator, you want to select. Sorry about that. You're going to select an investigator. You're going to tell him, okay, I want to. Do you able to recruit 100 of patients in your site? He say, obviously yes. But what happens? You divide that number by 2. You will get him how much he's going to recruit for you. And this tells you every time sites they fail. 2 of 3 sites they fail to recruit the number of patients. This is why you need to prepare backup sites. Patient retentions. I talked about like the follow-up, ensure compliance. So it will become much more hard in the next years. The quality of data you collect. I think John talked about it like the previous time, etc. What is the cost? Okay, because the cost is also a driver, right? It's also a driver for making, and this is also harder for many of us to do to collect the clinical evidence for your device. Okay, so I'll get quicker. I think I'm out of time. All right, so do not afraid to go globally. This is a picture right now of clinical dental studies going outside the world. So here, Europe, US, but you see Brazil, you have Turkey, Africa, wherever. So whatever it is, give you an example when you retrieve real-world data, for example, in France, in Europe, it could be also the same. In average, one patient gonna cost you 735 euros. If you want 1,000 of patients, so 700 multiplied by 1,000, so 700K. All right, 700K if you want to do 1,000 of real-world data, real-world study in France. 200K for Brazil. The same for the same evidence you're gonna get. 300K for Turkey for the same evidence. All right. However, how you ensure that the data you collect will be accepted by a notified body? I think many of you do not only sell in Europe. Some of you sell in the US, some of you sell in Japan, some of you. How do you ensure that the regulatory agency will say, okay, the data you collected in Europe, I can accept it? So obviously there is compliance first. So for example, in Europe, you have to ensure that the data you collect respect the GDPR, which is not the case in different countries. You have to ensure that the process follow up the ISO 14005. You have to provide the proof of that, the evidence of that, okay? But if you go in the US, you have to, if you go into China, you have to respect the GCP of China, but you have to provide proof of that. But the two other factors you have to respect, and this is independent of the regulations, it's the influence of ethnic factors and the standard of care. You will find other in the ECH E5. They are consolidated there. I think you must read if you want to do worldwide clinical studies. Maybe just this one quick, I'll give you just a story about drug elute stent. Drug elute stent, it's a stent that is coated with drugs, but it's a medical device. The action is mechanical, all right? And when you want to do worldwide clinical study for this, when you do study in Europe or you do study in the US, for example, and you want to go into Japan, the Japanese, they're going to ask you for domestic clinical trials. You're going to say, why? You're going to say, I want to see the pharmacokinetics of these drugs into the Japanese patients. That's the first thing. And this is a true story for worldwide clinical studies. And in addition to that, you have to integrate the standard of care because there is a problem in Japan called Japan regulatory lag. Any device comes into US, into Europe, gonna make many, many years to get into Japan because the submissions and the study and to get to the approval takes many, many longer. And therefore, when new devices that become standard of care, when he gets into Japan, the standard of care in the US and Europe changed. Okay, and when this study for the drug eluting stent here, they have in the protocol they have compared counter against BMS. It's another devices available at that time in the US, and they want to do that in Japan, but they couldn't do it because the standard of care in Japan, that medical device is not available there. So they are obliged to do not do a coordinated study. They are obliged to separate them. Yeah, for the US BMS and the standard of care in Japan was different at that time, yeah. And also the regulatory, they looked into three things to approve the device in Japan. First, they looked if there is like concomitant other drugs, other therapy could interact with the drug, with a drug-coated device. And they want to know that is there like difference in size and location of the target vessels between the Japanese and other location. And they want to look difference in lifestyle. Japanese sit with their leg folded under them more often than other population, which increase the risk of damage to the US implant in the thigh. So lifestyle, right? So this is just to tell you when you do studies, when you collect data overseas and you want to get it here, maybe cost you less, but you have to also look to these factors. Make sure that this factor also is comparable to the market where you want to get in. And thank you very much.
Any questions from the audience for James? Okay.
Well, just adding an anecdote. When you talk about pregnancy, that we often exclude this. We recently had the factor that we run a clinical study in Panama, and the Panama competent authority asked us on our exclusion criteria, why do we exclude pregnant women, and why do we exclude patients who are not able to give their legitimate consent? Because they said that's unethical unless you don't have a real reason why you exclude them. they would be underrepresented and they need to be included. So just that was a very new thinking to us, but yeah, they're right. Why do we exclude these patient groups without any specific reason other than it's easier to exclude them?
Good comment.
And just one more comment, we wanted to include pregnant women in one trial, and the investigators said, so how do you imagine we do that? Should all women who participate perform a pregnancy test before the trial? So basically we removed that requirement, or we removed that exclusion criteria.
Interesting. Okay, Robert?
Thank you for your presentation. Again, no question but a comment. Contraindications, red tape for me, because there are absolute contraindications. Okay, then no doubt about it, but most of them are relative contraindications, and we need to educate our notified bodies about this. Second comment, you had the vascular intervention, and they wanted 10 years follow-up. So what about comorbidities, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoking, Why all of that is out of a sudden impacted and just solely focused on the medical device? This is medical nonsense, sorry. And we need to push back on these items. Yes, we should have a good idea about the life expectancy of a device, that's nice. But on the other hand, we should be reasonable. If you go for the analogy with a natural bypass, this is usually gone after 6 months. And this is accepted because that's just giving time to have new vasculature. And for any type of stent or vascular implant, the request is completely different. This is nonsense, period.
Thank you. One last question?
Yeah. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you very much for the nice and practical presentation. And I agree with you. Running a trial, let's say on pacemakers for 10 years is nearly impossible. Using data from real-world sources might be a solution. I have one question. Do you have any experience in kind of having rotating patients into this trial? So you have a first set of patients coming first 5 years or until they are until they disappear, and then you enroll patients at year follow-up 3, 4, 5, and maybe at the end of the lifetime, so that the burden to follow one single patient for 10 years is much less.
No, I never done this before. I done 2 different trials. So the one I have discussed with, so when you combine real-world setting of medical claims with the registry of just like small size of patients, you just follow up them correctly, okay? In decentralized trial where if the patient don't want to come into these centers, which is fine, we just like bring them nurses into their home, and this is like facilitate the burden to come into the sites. So I find both of them effective.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a coffee break, sorry, but so we're going to take a short break for 25 minutes. So I'll see you again in 5 minutes to 3.